Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Should You Play, where I'm going to show you some spoiler-free gameplay and give you my thoughts after playing new games for a few hours, as well as highlighting and checking out at least one of the PlayStation Plus games for each month. In this video I'm playing one of the November 2024 PlayStation Plus games, Ghostwire Tokyo, the first-person action-adventure title that originally released in 2022. I've been aware of Ghostwire Tokyo for a few years and know that it's often loosely compared to the infamous games, with an emphasis on supernatural abilities and its open-world concept. But beyond that, I didn't know too much about the game before going into it. That being said, I'm having a lot of fun with it, even if there are some fairly obvious issues.
Gotta spell it out for you, I guess.
I'll also note that I typically leave the spoken language at its default, which for Ghostwire Tokyo is Japanese, but for this, I changed it to English so I could go through the action sequences without missing important information in the subtitles. With that being said, let's talk about the game.
Anyway, enough talk. Let's get moving.
As soon as you start a new game, a pretty extensive cinematic packed with a ton of information will introduce you to your character Akito, who has just gotten into a bad car accident. Very shortly after, an occultist releases spirits all across Tokyo, and one of them makes its way into Akito's body. From there, Akito and the spirit, also known as KK, begin to fight back against the paranormal forces that have taken over Tokyo, and work together to rescue Mari, Akito's sister, from the occultists.
Are you saying that everyone in Shibuya is gone?
Yeah, at least 50 to 100,000 will have vanished by now. Probably more.
Narrative aside, Ghostwire Tokyo is steeped in the supernatural and Japanese mythology, which really helped flesh out the world a bit more since, honestly, I didn't find myself super invested in the story itself.
Oh, boo-hoo.
As of recording, I've played up to the start of Chapter 4, and while I like Akito, KK, and the love-hate relationship between the two of them, I felt like I was just going through the motions with everything else. Fortunately, there's a good amount of side missions, collectibles, and upgrades to keep your interest as well, and those will help you stay invested if you're the kind of gamer who's more into exploring every nook and cranny than the overarching plot.
All that matters is we're on the same path. Me and you.
Now, the first thing I'll recommend here before I get into the specifics of the gameplay is that you'll want to adjust some of the settings right away. The default controls are really sluggish, resulting in time-delayed responses and a slew of other issues. So I personally recommend adjusting the motion blur settings, switching over to performance mode, and adjusting the camera sensitivity, as well as anything else that you may feel needs tweaking. For me, it made a huge difference in how the game performed, even if the trade-off resulted in a slightly lower graphic quality. With that out of the way, let's dive into the gameplay. Ghostwire Tokyo is a first-person action-adventure game in which you're navigating a depopulated Tokyo. The basic controls won't come as a surprise, with movement, jumping, and attacking being the most important ones. However, having the L2 button, at least on PS5, be your interact button, felt a bit unintuitive. And even after a few hours of playing, I still found myself jumping by accident when trying to open doors or pick up healing items. Thankfully, everything else on this front was good, especially navigation. The city feels very overwhelming at first, but as you take in your surroundings, you'll start to realize that between the physical walls and the supernatural fog, it's always pretty clear where you need to be going. And if that isn't enough for you, you'll unlock an ability in Chapter 2 that will also act as a navigation assist. However, despite the ease of navigation, I sometimes found the world to feel a bit empty. While visually mesmerizing and narratively accurate, the emptiness of Tokyo's streets often led to long stretches with little to do but walk, even taking into consideration the side quests and enemies that are scattered around the city. Ghostwire Tokyo has a combat system that primarily revolves around three elemental abilities: wind, water, and fire, each with their own strengths and weaknesses. You'll also have access to other combat items and abilities such as a bow, melee attacks, and talismans, but your primary source of damage dealing will be from these three elements. The combat is overall mostly fun, but there really isn't too much variety to be had with it. As you level up, you'll gain access to new unlockable abilities, but they're mostly add-ons to your current skills rather than additional powers, such as cooldown speed, increased damage, faster movement speed, and so on. The game's enemies, known as visitors, don't offer a ton of variety, but they're easy to distinguish from other variations based purely on their appearance, and I absolutely love their designs, even if there aren't a ton of them.
Friends of yours?
As for bosses, most of the fights so far just seem to present bigger enemies with bigger health bars, rather than giving you a chance to defeat them in interesting ways or by using certain mechanics to take them down. However, there are one or two that require a bit more finesse to defeat, instead of just focusing on dealing as much damage as possible. It's not that the combat is bad, because I wouldn't necessarily use that word here, but after a while it begins to feel a bit one-note, and I would have liked to have seen a bit more depth from the combat system and enemies.
We're done here. Let's move on.
Now, Ghostwire Tokyo may not top my list of the world's prettiest looking games, but any game that drenches itself in LED lights, rain, and an abundance of particle effects, and does it well, is bound to impress. And I didn't see any textures popping or inconsistent shadows or reflections either. The only thing I'll mention is that specifically during cutscenes, I did notice a good amount of low quality objects, but during gameplay, everything looked pretty good. As for bugs and glitches, there's only one that I noticed, and it was an odd one. A few different times throughout my playing, I found that I was just dragged to the left of the screen. At first I thought it might have been stick drift kicking in on an older controller, but I found it happening a few times even with a brand new controller swapped in and after rebooting my system. I'm not sure what caused it, but because it happened more than once, I wanted to mention it.
Dunno. Who's to say?
Aside from that, there were only a few hiccups, and I noticed that most of them went away after I made the setting changes that I mentioned at the top of the video.
Count your lucky stars.
So should you play Ghostwire Tokyo? Overall, it's a solid gaming experience with a lot of potential, and I'd lean more towards a yes than a no. Though it can get repetitive, the open world environment is pretty and the combat is fun, but the lack of enemy variety, empty environments, and the somewhat predictable story are a bit of a letdown. If you're a fan of games like Far Cry or Dishonored, I'd recommend at least trying it out for the gameplay alone. Just don't expect it to have the same level of depth or nuance in its storytelling or world design.
With this, my plan is complete.
As always though, this is just my opinion. If you're just starting to learn how to control your new abilities, or if you've already spent a good amount of time trying to return Tokyo to its original state, let me know in the comments what you thought of Ghostwire Tokyo.
Come on. We need to get out there and help as many spirits as we can.
Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.
We got more coming in.